As darkness envelopes you, the air grows thick with the weight of untold horrors that have haunted Mexico for centuries. You feel a cold breath on your neck and hear distant whispers calling your name, luring you into the shadows of ancient ruins and cursed islands. Are you brave enough to uncover the terrifying truths behind the legends? Or will the chilling spirits you awaken follow you home, forever binding you to their dark secrets? Chapter 1. La Llorona, the Weeping Woman. In the dead of night, when the moon is swallowed by darkness and silence wraps around the landscape, the chilling wail of a woman pierces the air. It is not the cry of an animal or a passing breeze, but something far more unnerving, a sound drenched in agony, filled with unbearable loss. The locals know better than to investigate. It is the cry of La Llorona, the Weeping Woman, who roams the rivers and lakes of Mexico, eternally searching for her drowned children. For centuries, this figure has haunted the nightmares of those who live near water. Her tale, shrouded in tragedy, has become one of the most enduring legends in Mexican folklore. But La Llorona is more than just a story told to frighten children. She is a ghost who has been seen, heard, and felt by many, and her presence lingers long after her cries fade into the night. The story of La Llorona is a tale of overwhelming grief and remorse. Legend has it that she was once a beautiful woman named Maria, whose beauty captivated a wealthy man. Together, they had 2 children, and for a while, they lived in happiness. But Maria's husband, weary of his domestic life, eventually grew distant. He left her for another woman, abandoning Maria and her children. Devastated by betrayal, Maria sank into despair. One fateful evening, in a fit of uncontrollable rage and sorrow, she drowned her children in a river. The moment their small bodies disappeared beneath the water, Maria realized what she had done. Overcome with regret, she threw herself into the river to join them in death. However, the afterlife offered no peace. According to the legend, Maria's spirit was condemned to wander the earth for eternity, searching for her lost children, her agonizing wails a constant reminder of her sin. Today, La Llorona is said to appear by rivers and lakes, dressed in a white gown, her face obscured by shadows. Those who encounter her say that she weeps and cries out, Mis hijos, my children, my children." She searches, desperate to find the souls of her drowned offspring. But those who cross her path often meet a terrible fate, for it is said that La Llorona mistakes others for her lost children, and may pull them into the water to share their doom. The legend of La Llorona is not confined to a single town or region. Across Mexico, there are countless stories of eerie encounters with the ghostly weeping woman, each more harrowing than the last. These stories are not just folklore. They are based on real accounts, passed down through generations, of people who have seen, heard, and felt her presence. One such case comes from the city of Mexico, along the banks of the Xochimilco canals. One night, a group of tourists was taking a late boat ride through the canals when they heard a distant wail. The guide, a man well-versed in local legends, told the tourists to remain calm and keep their voices low. As the boat drifted along, the cries grew louder, and suddenly, a figure appeared on the shore. She wore a long, flowing white dress, and her face was hidden beneath dark hair. The group watched in terrified silence as the figure moved closer to the water, her sobs filling the air. Without a word, she vanished into the night, leaving only the sound of her weeping behind. In another account, a man named Julio was driving near a river in the outskirts of Chihuahua late one evening. His car stalled unexpectedly, and as he tried to restart it, he heard soft sobbing in the distance. At first, he dismissed it as his imagination, but the sobbing grew louder, closer, until it seemed to surround him. He looked into his rearview mirror and saw the faint outline of a woman in white standing behind his car. Her head was lowered, her face hidden. Paralyzed by fear, Julio watched as she slowly moved closer. Then, just as she reached his window, she disappeared. His car roared back to life moments later, and Julio sped away, leaving the unsettling encounter behind. But perhaps the most unsettling stories come from those who live in small villages, where the presence of La Llorona is deeply ingrained in everyday life. In the village of Tlaxcala, a mother was woken one night by the sound of her children crying. Rushing to their bedroom, she found them huddled together in fear, pointing towards the window. Outside, standing at the edge of the river that ran behind their house, was a woman in white, her long hair trailing in the wind. The mother watched in horror as the figure raised her arms and let out a wail that sent shivers down her spine. She knew, without a doubt, that she had witnessed La Llorona. The legend of La Llorona is one of Mexico's most enduring ghost stories, passed down through generations as both a cautionary tale and a reflection of deeper societal fears. It resonates with themes of loss, grief, and maternal sorrow, emotions that transcend time and culture. In many ways, La Llorona is a representation of the consequences of desperation and unchecked emotion. Some historians believe that the origins of the legend may date back to the time of the Spanish conquest, when indigenous women were often left abandoned by their Spanish lovers, forced to raise children alone in a society that had little regard for them. Others suggest that La Llorona is an embodiment of the Aztec goddess Cihuacoatl, a deity associated with motherhood and child loss, who was said to appear as a weeping woman. Whatever her origins, La Llorona remains a powerful symbol in Mexican culture. Her tale has been adapted into countless stories, films, and even songs, cementing her place as one of the most feared and recognizable figures in Mexican folklore. But for those who live near rivers and lakes, her story is more than just a legend. It is a reality that can be felt in the stillness of the night, in the whispers carried on the wind, and in the mournful cry that echoes through the darkness. Chapter 2. The Haunted Island of the Dolls. Deep within the twisting canals of Xochimilco, south of Mexico City, lies La Isla de las Muñecas, the Island of the Dolls. Even by day, it is an eerie sight. Decaying dolls hang from trees, their sun-bleached faces cracked, and their lifeless eyes staring vacantly at those who dare approach. As the wind stirs, their limbs sway, creating an unsettling symphony of creaks and groans. Yet it is the night, when darkness settles over the canals and the island's twisted inhabitants seem to come alive, that La Isla de las Muñecas reveals its true, terrifying nature. What began as a small, isolated plot of land became a grotesque shrine to an unknown spirit. The man behind this transformation, Don Julian Santana, claimed he was haunted by the ghost of a young girl who had drowned in the nearby waters. For decades, he lived alone on the island, devoting his life to appeasing her restless spirit by collecting dolls, hundreds of them. But those who have visited the island since his death say his efforts were in vain. The ghost still lingers, and now, so do the dolls, moving, whispering, watching. The story of the island begins with tragedy. In the 1950s, Don Julian Santana arrived in Xochimilco, seeking solitude. The small, marshy island he settled on was perfect for a quiet, isolated existence. But shortly after his arrival, he claimed to have witnessed something horrifying: the body of a young girl floating in the canal. Though he tried to save her, it was too late. The girl had drowned, her small lifeless form slipping beneath the water. Shortly after the girl's death, strange things began happening on the island. Don Julian heard whispers, sobs, and footsteps in the night. He believed the girl's spirit was haunting him, demanding something, but he didn't know what. One day, while walking along the canal, he found a doll floating in the water. Convinced it was a sign from the spirit, he hung the doll in a tree as a way to honor her memory and placate her restless soul. But it didn't stop there. Don Julian became obsessed with collecting dolls, hanging them from trees, nailing them to posts, and placing them all around the island. The dolls, many of them missing limbs or eyes, created a macabre and unsettling atmosphere. Some were gifts from visitors, while others Don Julian salvaged from trash heaps. To him, each doll was an offering, a way to keep the girl's spirit at bay. Yet despite his efforts, the paranormal activity continued. The whispers grew louder, the footsteps more persistent, and Don Julian became convinced the dolls themselves were possessed. After Don Julian's death in 2001, the island became infamous, attracting curious tourists and paranormal investigators alike. Many who visit the island report strange phenomena, particularly when the sun begins to set and the dolls are shrouded in shadow. Visitors describe an overwhelming sense of dread, as if being watched, not just by the decaying dolls, but by something far more sinister. One of the most frequently reported occurrences is the sensation that the dolls are moving. Tourists often claim to see dolls' eyes following them, or worse, hear them whispering in faint, raspy voices. In one documented incident, a group of visitors from Mexico City brought a voice recorder with them to capture the eerie sounds of the island. As they walked through the trees lined with dolls, the device recorded what sounded like a child's soft weeping, followed by faint, unintelligible whispers. No one in the group had heard the sounds in person. The recording sent chills down their spines and solidified the island's reputation as a paranormal hotspot. Other visitors have described seeing dolls' heads turning on their own or catching glimpses of small, shadowy figures darting among the trees. Some report the dolls appearing in different places than they had been before. In one particularly disturbing account, a visitor named Juan and his friends spent the night on the island to test their courage. Throughout the night, they heard what sounded like faint giggling, followed by the rustling of leaves, even though there was no wind. At one point, Juan noticed that a doll hanging from a tree near their campsite had moved, its head now facing directly towards him, though no one had touched it. The next morning, he discovered small footprints in the mud leading toward the canal, even though no children had been on the island. Such reports are common among those who dare to visit the island after dark, and many leave convinced that Don Julian was right. The spirit of the drowned girl still haunts the place, using the dolls as vessels for her presence. For nearly 50 years, Don Julian Santana lived in isolation, tending to his island of dolls, speaking to them as though they were alive, and continuing his ritual of collecting more and more. Some locals say he became unhinged, that the solitude and guilt drove him to madness. Others believe he was genuinely haunted by the spirit of the drowned girl, and that his actions were those of a desperate man trying to protect himself. Don Julian's death was as mysterious as the legend he left behind. In 2001, his body was found in the same spot where he claimed to have found the drowned girl so many years before. The circumstances of his death remain unclear, but locals insist it was the girl's spirit that took him. In their eyes, Don Julian had failed to appease her, and in the end, she claimed his life. Today, La Isla de las Muñecas has become a popular, if unsettling, tourist destination. Visitors from around the world come to see the bizarre collection of dolls, but many leave with more than just photographs. The island's haunted reputation continues to grow, fueled by the countless eerie experiences shared by those who venture there. Some come in search of a thrill, others out of morbid curiosity, but few leave without feeling the island's strange, suffocating atmosphere. La Isla de las Muñecas has become a symbol of Xochimilco's darker side. While the region is known for its picturesque canals and vibrant culture, the island stands as a stark contrast, a place where death and the supernatural feel disturbingly close. The dolls, with their decayed faces and empty eyes, have become an iconic image, symbolizing not only the haunting of a single man, but the broader cultural fascination with death and the afterlife that pervades Mexican folklore. Tourists are drawn to the island not only by the promise of a chilling experience, but by the mystery that surrounds it. Is it truly haunted? Or is it simply the imagination running wild in a place so steeped in death and decay? For those who have heard the whispers, felt the eyes of the dolls upon them, or sensed the presence of something unseen lurking among the trees, the answer is clear. Chapter 3. The Ghost of the Ex-Convent of San Agustin. The ex-convent of San Agustin in Aguascalientes stands as a haunting remnant of the past, its weathered stone walls steeped in history, its corridors filled with whispers of suffering and death. Though its purpose has shifted over the centuries, its dark past remains etched into the very bones of the building. Once a place of religious devotion, it now harbors an unsettling legacy, stories of ghostly apparitions, unexplained sounds, and a lingering presence that chills the hearts of those who dare enter. Situated in the historic center of Aguascalientes, the ex-convent has long been a site of fascination for paranormal investigators and curious tourists alike. It is said that the souls of the dead still walk its halls, unable to find peace. But these are not just the murmurings of superstition. Many who have entered the ex-convent with skepticism have left with no doubt. Something otherworldly lurks within its walls. Built in the 16th century, the ex-convent of San Agustin was once a grand religious institution, a place where monks dedicated their lives to worship and study. However, the convent's history is marred by tales of hardship, death, and tragedy. During the turbulent years of colonial rule and religious persecution, the convent became a refuge for those seeking shelter from violence, and many died within its walls, either from disease or at the hands of invading forces. Over time, the convent was abandoned, left to decay and rot. But it seems that not all who live there have moved on. Reports of hauntings at the ex-convent date back decades. Staff, visitors, and even security guards have shared stories of unexplainable events, strange noises echoing through the stone corridors, and ghostly figures that vanish just as suddenly as they appear. For some, these experiences are fleeting, a cold breeze on a hot day, the sound of footsteps in an empty hall. For others, the encounters are far more terrifying. One of the most frequently reported phenomena is the appearance of shadowy figures that seem to emerge from the walls themselves. These apparitions are often described as monks, their ghostly forms cloaked in long, dark robes. They are seen walking through the halls, their faces obscured, their movements deliberate but silent. Witnesses describe how the figures appear for only a few seconds before fading away, leaving behind an overwhelming sense of unease. In one particularly chilling account, a night guard was making his rounds when he noticed a figure standing at the far end of a corridor. The figure was dressed in the traditional robes of an Augustinian monk, his head bowed in prayer. The guard, assuming it was a visitor who had somehow remained after closing, approached the figure to ask him to leave. But as he drew closer, the figure began to dissolve into thin air. The guard froze, unable to move, as the shadowy monk disappeared entirely, leaving only the echo of soft chanting in the air. Shaken, the guard immediately resigned from his position, refusing to return to the ex-convent. In addition to ghostly apparitions, many have reported hearing inexplicable sounds within the ex-convent. Disembodied voices, footsteps, and the sound of doors opening and closing without any human intervention are common occurrences. Visitors often describe hearing the faint whispers of prayer, as if the monks who once inhabited the convent are still conducting their daily rituals, unaware that centuries have passed. A particularly disturbing phenomenon is the sound of a woman crying, which has been heard echoing through the halls on multiple occasions. Some believe this could be the spirit of a woman who sought sanctuary in the convent during one of the violent uprisings in the region, only to meet a tragic end. The cries are said to be faint at first, almost imperceptible, but they grow louder and more desperate as night falls, filling the air with an overwhelming sense of sorrow. One former tour guide, who worked at the ex-convent for several years, recounted an experience that left her deeply shaken. While giving a tour of the convent's cloisters, she began to feel an intense pressure on her chest, as though an invisible force was squeezing the air out of her lungs. At the same time, she heard what sounded like heavy breathing coming from behind her. When she turned around, expecting to see one of the tourists, she found herself alone. The sensation became unbearable, and she rushed out of the building, gasping for air. She never returned to the ex-convent, convinced that whatever presence haunts the site had targeted her specifically. One of the most infamous areas in the ex-convent is a small, dimly lit room known to locals as La Sala de la Muerte, the death room. According to historical records, this room was used to store the bodies of monks and others who had died within the convent before they could be buried. The air in the room is said to be thick with the oppressive weight of death, and many who enter report feeling an overwhelming sense of dread. Several paranormal investigators who have visited the death room have documented disturbing activity. Some have captured recordings of unexplained voices, while others have experienced physical sensations, such as being touched by invisible hands or feeling a sudden drop in temperature. One investigator reported that as he stood in the room, he felt something brush against his leg. Looking down, he saw nothing, but the sensation of being watched was palpable. He left the room shaken and convinced that the spirits of the dead still linger in that confined space. The dark energy that pervades the ex-convent of San Agustin is often attributed to the suffering that took place within its walls. During its time as a sanctuary, the convent housed many who were fleeing violence, illness, and death. In one particularly harrowing period, the convent was used as a makeshift hospital during a cholera outbreak. The disease claimed the lives of many within its walls, and it is said that the spirits of those who died, unable to receive proper burials, still roam the halls. Some historians believe that the convent's tragic past is key to understanding its haunting. The deaths of so many people in such a concentrated space, coupled with the religious fervor that defined life within the convent, may have created a kind of spiritual echo, a residual energy that refuses to dissipate. This, they argue, is why the spirits of the monks are still seen, why the sounds of prayer and chanting can still be heard, and why the dead continue to cry out for peace. The ex-convent of San Agustin is more than just a relic of Mexico's colonial past. It is a place where history and the supernatural collide, where the souls of the dead refuse to be forgotten. Those who have dared to enter its haunted halls leave with more than just stories. They leave with a profound sense of unease, a lingering fear that the spirits within are not yet ready to rest. Chapter 4. The Haunted Streets of Guanajuato. The city of Guanajuato is a place where history and the supernatural seem intertwined. Its winding streets, lined with colorful colonial buildings, are filled with echoes of the past. But beneath the vibrant exterior lies a city haunted by tales of tragedy, death, and love. Among the most infamous of these is the legend of the Callejón del Beso, the Alley of the Kiss. A narrow alleyway tucked away in the heart of the city, it is the site of one of Mexico's most tragic love stories, and according to many who walk its cobblestone path, a place where the spirits of the past still linger. The story of the Callejón del Beso is one of passion and heartbreak, a tale that has become as much a part of Guanajuato's identity as its iconic silver mines. According to local legend, the alley was the setting for a forbidden romance between a young woman named Ana and a humble miner named Carlos. Anna's father, a wealthy and controlling man, disapproved of their love and forbade her from seeing Carlos. Desperate to be together, the couple found solace in the narrow alleyway where their homes stood on either side, so close that the balconies nearly touched. There, they would meet in secret, exchanging whispered promises and stolen kisses. Their love, however, was not to be. One night, Anna's father discovered them and, in a fit of rage, plunged a dagger into his daughter's chest, killing her in front of Carlos. The miner, devastated by the loss of his beloved, threw himself from the balcony, his body shattering on the stone street below. It is said that their blood soaked into the very stones of the alley, forever binding their souls to the place where their love met its tragic end. Though the legend may sound like a romantic fable, many locals and visitors claim that the alley is haunted by the ghosts of Ana and Carlos. Couples who visit the alley today are encouraged to kiss on the third step of the alley staircase, a gesture said to bring good luck and eternal love. But for some, the alley holds a much darker energy, a place where tragedy lingers and the restless spirits of the past still roam. Over the years, numerous accounts of strange and unexplained phenomena have emerged from the Callejón del Beso. Visitors report hearing whispers in the dead of night, soft voices carried on the wind that seem to echo through the narrow walls. Others describe seeing shadowy figures moving between the balconies, disappearing before their eyes. These sightings are often accompanied by a deep sense of sadness, as if the air itself is heavy with grief. One of the most chilling reports comes from a group of tourists who visited the alley late one evening. As they stood on the infamous third step, taking photographs and discussing the legend, they suddenly felt an intense drop in temperature. The warm night air turned icy, and one of the group members claimed to feel a hand brush against her cheek, though no one was near her. Startled, she turned to look, but there was nothing there. Moments later, they all heard a faint, mournful cry, so soft it could have been the wind, but with a distinct human quality that sent chills down their spines. The group quickly left the alley, convinced they had encountered something not of this world. Local residents, too, have their own stories of eerie encounters in the Callejón del Beso. One shopkeeper, whose business is located near the alley, recalls hearing footsteps late at night after closing, long after the tourists had gone. The footsteps seemed to pace back and forth, as if someone were walking in anguish. When he went to investigate, the alley was empty, but the sound continued, growing louder as if moving closer to him. He left quickly, refusing to return until daylight. Another unsettling event occurred during the filming of a local documentary about the ghost stories of Guanajuato. As the crew set up their equipment near the alley, they captured footage of what appeared to be a faint, ghostly figure moving between the balconies. At first, they assumed it was a trick of the light, but upon reviewing the footage, they noticed the figure seemed to materialize out of nowhere, hovering briefly before vanishing into thin air. The crew was left unnerved, and the documentary was never completed. The haunting of the Callejón del Beso has become a deeply ingrained part of Guanajuato's cultural identity. It is a story passed down through generations, woven into the fabric of the city's folklore. The alley itself has become a major tourist attraction, drawing couples from around the world who seek to partake in the tradition of the kiss on the third step. Yet, for every romantic gesture, there is an underlying awareness that the alley is a place of sorrow, a reminder of love lost, of tragedy that cannot be undone. In addition to the Callejón del Beso, Guanajuato is known for its many other ghost stories, many of which are tied to the city's turbulent history. As a major mining hub during Mexico's colonial era, the city saw its share of violence, death, and hardship. These historical events, coupled with the city's labyrinthine streets and subterranean tunnels, have created an atmosphere ripe for tales of the supernatural. The legend of the Callejón del Beso has also become a symbol of the duality that exists in Mexican folklore, the intertwining of love and death, passion and tragedy. This duality is reflected in the city's annual Festival Internacional Cervantino, a cultural event that celebrates both life and the macabre, drawing on Guanajuato's rich artistic and literary heritage. The festival often features performances and exhibits that explore themes of love, death, and the supernatural, with the Callejón del Beso serving as a focal point for these stories. But for all its cultural significance, the alley remains, at its core, a place where the past refuses to rest. Locals believe that Ana and Carlos are still there, trapped in a tragic loop, their spirits replaying the final moments of their ill-fated love. Some claim to have seen Anna's ghost standing on her balcony, her face pale and tear-streaked, her eyes searching for Carlos. Others have heard Carlos's footsteps echoing through the narrow passageway, as if he is still trying to reach her, unaware that they are separated by more than just their balconies now, but by death itself. The Callejón del Beso stands as a testament to the powerful emotions that can anchor spirits to the physical world. Love, in its purest form, is often seen as a force for good, but in Guanajuato, the Callejón del Beso serves as a reminder that love can also be destructive. The tragic story of Ana and Carlos has not only shaped the city's folklore, but has also become a part of its living culture, drawing visitors who are both enchanted and unsettled by the alley's dark history. Chapter 5. The Phantom Train of the Devil's Curve. In the shadowy hills of Veracruz, near a treacherous bend in the railway known as La Cava del Diablo, the Devil's Curve, rumors of a spectral train have persisted for decades. Locals speak of ghostly whistles that echo through the night and a faint light that appears along the tracks, only to vanish as mysteriously as it came. The haunting tale of the Phantom Train has become a chilling legend in the region, a grim reminder of the tragic accidents that once plagued this stretch of railway. For years, The Devil's Curve has been infamous among railroad workers. Sharp, narrow, and perilously close to a steep drop, the curve earned its name from the treacherous conditions it posed to both trains and their crews. Accidents were not uncommon, and it is said that the souls of those who perished in fiery wrecks are still bound to the iron rails, their presence marked by the spectral train that roams the tracks. The first reports of the phantom train date back to the early 20th century, shortly after a particularly devastating derailment occurred on the Devil's Curve. On a dark, stormy night, a freight train carrying supplies lost control as it rounded the curve. The train, unable to stop in time, plunged off the tracks and into the ravine below, its cars smashing into the rocky terrain. Many of the crew members were killed instantly, their bodies crushed beneath the twisted metal of the wreckage. The survivors, though few, spoke of the terror they felt as the train careened out of control, the deafening sound of screeching wheels and shattering glass haunting them for the rest of their lives. In the weeks following the accident, locals began to hear strange noises near the site of the wreck. The sound of a train whistle, shrill and eerie, pierced the night air, even though no train was scheduled to pass. Some reported hearing the screech of wheels against the tracks, accompanied by the distant roar of a locomotive. When they ventured out to investigate, they found nothing, only the empty rails glinting in the moonlight. As the years passed, these reports grew more frequent. Travelers passing through the area late at night spoke of seeing the lights of an approaching train, only for it to disappear as they neared the Devil's Curve. Railroad workers, too, began to share stories of strange occurrences on the tracks. One night, a signalman stationed near the curve witnessed a train barreling toward him at full speed. Panicked, he tried to signal the engineer, but the train never arrived. Instead, it vanished into the darkness, leaving the man shaken and confused. When he reported the incident to his superiors, they told him there had been no train scheduled on that section of track. Over the decades, numerous first-hand accounts of encounters with the phantom train have surfaced, each more unsettling than the last. In one particularly chilling story, a group of workers were conducting maintenance on the tracks late one night. As they worked, they heard the unmistakable sound of a train approaching from the distance, the low rumble of the engine, and the rhythmic clatter of wheels on the rails. Assuming it was a passing freight train, they moved to the side of the tracks to let it pass. But as the sound grew louder, they realized something was wrong. There were no lights, no visible train, just the deafening noise of a locomotive bearing down on them. Panicked, they scrambled away from the tracks, expecting to be hit. But nothing came. The sound faded into the night, leaving only the faint echo of the train's whistle in the distance. In another account, a local farmer named Rodrigo recounted how, on a particularly foggy evening, he saw the ghostly glow of a train's headlight moving along the tracks near the Devil's Curve. He watched in stunned silence as the light passed by his property, the silhouette of a train visible for only a few moments before it dissolved into the mist. Rodrigo claimed that he could hear the voices of the crew, shouting orders and calls for help, as if they were reliving the final moments of the ill-fated train that had crashed so many years before. Travelers who passed through the area at night have also reported strange occurrences. Some have spoken of hearing the distant sound of a train whistle, growing louder and closer, but no train ever appears. Others have described seeing shadowy figures standing near the tracks, as if waiting for a train that will never arrive. The most unsettling reports come from those who claim to have felt the ground beneath them shake, as though a train were rumbling by. Yet when they look, the tracks are empty, silent. To understand the haunting of the Devil's Curve, one must look back at the tragic history of the railway. The curve itself was a notorious death trap, a sharp bend on an otherwise straight line of track that often caught engineers off guard. The steep grade of the land and the proximity to a deep ravine made it nearly impossible to recover from a mistake, and many trains met their doom here. The most devastating accident occurred in 1927, when a passenger train en route to Veracruz derailed at high speed as it attempted to round the curve. The train, filled with families and workers, was unable to slow down in time, and the entire locomotive was thrown off the tracks. Cars toppled over one another, crushing passengers beneath the weight of the wreckage. Rescue efforts were slow, and by the time help arrived, dozens had already perished. Those who survived the crash described the horror of being trapped in the mangled cars, surrounded by the screams of the dying. Many of the bodies were never recovered from the ravine, their remains lost to the unforgiving terrain. It is said that the souls of these victims now haunt the tracks, their restless spirits bound to the place where they met their untimely end. The phantom train, locals believe, is a manifestation of the tragedy, a spectral replay of the horrific accidents that took place on the Devil's Curve. The legend of the phantom train has become an integral part of the local folklore in Veracruz. Though the railway is no longer in use, the stories persist, passed down through generations of locals who swear that the haunting is real. Some claim that the train is a warning, a reminder of the dangers that once lurked on the Devil's Curve. Others believe that the souls of the dead are trapped in a cycle, endlessly reliving the moment of their demise. The Devil's Curve remains a place of eerie fascination for those who visit the area. Paranormal investigators have ventured to the site in search of evidence, often leaving with recordings of unexplained sounds, whistles, footsteps, and the faint roar of a train that can't be seen. Some have captured photographs of strange lights hovering near the tracks, while others have felt a sudden chill in the air, as if the ghostly train is passing through once again. Chapter 6. The Witch's House of Tepoztlan. Tucked into the mountains of Morelos, the town of Tepoztlan is known for its mystical air, home to ancient pyramids, shamanic healers, and whispers of supernatural occurrences. But among its eerie tales, one stands out above the rest. La Casa de la Bruja, the Witch's House. Perched on the edge of town, this dilapidated, crumbling house has long been the source of spine-chilling stories. Locals believe it was once the home of a powerful and malevolent witch, and to this day, visitors to the site report strange happenings, inexplicable feelings of dread, and the sensation of being watched by unseen forces. The legend of La Casa de la Bruja dates back to the early 20th century. According to locals, the house was once inhabited by a woman who practiced dark magic, a witch whose powers struck fear into the hearts of those who crossed her path. Her name has been lost to time, but the stories surrounding her remain vivid in the memories of the townspeople. It is said that she was capable of controlling the elements, summoning storms, and cursing those who dared to trespass near her home. Her reputation grew when livestock began dying mysteriously, their bodies found drained of blood or mutilated in inexplicable ways. Crops withered overnight, and strange figures were seen lurking in the shadows of the witch's property. Villagers who dared to confront her met with tragic fates. Some disappeared without a trace, while others were found wandering the hills in a trance, their minds shattered. Many believed the witch had the ability to summon Alux's small, mischievous spirits, known in local folklore for wreaking havoc on crops and homes. Eventually, the witch vanished, but her house remained. And though she was gone, the malevolent energy surrounding the house only seemed to grow stronger. Locals avoided the area, believing it to be cursed, and even today, few dare to approach the dilapidated structure after dark. Over the years, several brave or foolhardy visitors have ventured into the witch's house, often with terrifying results. One of the most well-known stories comes from a group of tourists who visited the site in the 1990s. They were drawn to Tepoztlan by its reputation as a spiritual and mystical destination, but they had heard whispers of La Casa de la Bruja and decided to investigate for themselves. The group arrived in the late afternoon, but as they approached the house, a sudden sense of unease washed over them. The air seemed to thicken, and a strange stillness settled around the property. Ignoring their growing apprehension, they entered the house. Inside, they found rooms filled with dust and decay, the walls covered in strange, faded symbols. But the most unsettling part was the overwhelming feeling of being watched. One of the group members, a woman named Maria, later recounted how she felt invisible eyes following her every movement. As they explored deeper into the house, strange noises began to echo through the empty halls, footsteps, whispers, and the faint sound of something scraping against the floor. At one point, One of the tourists felt a cold hand brush against his shoulder, though no one was near him. The group decided to leave, but as they made their way out of the house, they noticed something horrifying. Several of the dolls scattered around the property, many of them old and tattered, had seemingly moved, their positions different from when the group first entered. The sense of dread was palpable, and they fled the property in a panic, swearing never to return. Another story, this time from a local named Jorge, recounts an encounter with the witch's house during his youth. Jorge and his friends, like many boys in the town, had grown up hearing the stories about the house. In their teenage years, they decided to test their courage by visiting the house one night. Armed with nothing but flashlights, they crept up to the house under the cover of darkness. At first, nothing seemed amiss, but as they stood near the entrance, Jorge heard a low, guttural whisper in his ear. Startled, he turned to his friends, but none of them had spoken. Moments later, the wind picked up, howling through the trees, though the night had been calm only seconds before. The boys felt the air grow unnaturally cold, and as they prepared to leave, one of them let out a scream. A dark figure stood in the doorway of the house, a shadowy, indistinct shape that seemed to be watching them. Frozen in terror, they stared at the figure, which then slowly retreated into the darkness of the house, disappearing from view. Without a word, the boys sprinted back to town, convinced they had come face to face with the ghost of the witch herself. In addition to sightings of the witch's ghostly figure, many who visit La Casa de la Bruja report encounters with strange, small creatures believed to be Aluxes. These spirits, according to Mesoamerican folklore, are trickster beings known for their mischievous behavior. Some locals believe that the witch summoned these creatures to do her bidding, and even after her death, they continue to haunt the property. Several visitors have reported seeing fleeting glimpses of these small, humanoid figures darting through the shadows, their eyes glowing in the dark. Others have experienced bizarre phenomena, such as objects being moved or stolen, strange laughter echoing through the air, and sudden gusts of wind that seem to come from nowhere. The presence of the Aluxes is often accompanied by an overwhelming sense of unease, as though the creatures are watching from the darkness, waiting for the right moment to strike. Tepoztlan's association with witchcraft and the supernatural is deeply rooted in its history. The town itself is located near the ancient pyramid of Tepoztlico, a site dedicated to the Aztec god of pulque and fertility, and the region has long been considered a place of spiritual energy and mysticism. Many local shamans and healers still practice ancient rituals, and stories of witches and supernatural beings have been passed down through generations. Witchcraft in Mexico, particularly in rural areas, has often been intertwined with indigenous beliefs and practices. While some witches are believed to be healers or protectors, others, like the ones said to have lived in La Casa de la Bruja, are feared for their malevolent powers. The fear of witches is deeply ingrained in local folklore, with tales of curses, dark magic, and supernatural vengeance forming a central part of the cultural fabric. The legend of the witch's house has only reinforced these beliefs, serving as a cautionary tale about the dangers of meddling with forces beyond comprehension. To this day, many in Tepoztlan believe that the witch's spirit lingers in the house, watching over her dark domain and punishing those who dare to disturb her rest. La Casa de la Bruja has become more than just a local legend. It is a symbol of the town's mysterious and supernatural heritage. Though many refuse to visit the site, it continues to draw curious tourists and paranormal enthusiasts, all eager to experience the eerie presence for themselves. But for those who live in Tepoztlan, the house is a place to be avoided, a grim reminder of the dark forces that once roamed the land. Chapter 7. The Haunting of the Palacio de los Deportes. The Palacio de los Deportes in Mexico City is known for hosting some of the largest concerts and sporting events in the country, but beneath the bright lights and roaring crowds lies a much darker history. Over the years, numerous reports have surfaced of strange occurrences within the arena, ghostly apparitions, unexplained noises, and an overwhelming sense of dread felt by performers and attendees alike. The hauntings of the Palacio have become a terrifying legend, an eerie reminder that the past never truly fades, even in the most unexpected places. One of the most well-documented supernatural events at the Palacio de los Deportes took place during a major concert in the mid-2000s. The artist, a renowned international performer, had taken the stage in front of thousands of adoring fans. As the crowd roared and the music reverberated through the arena, something strange began to happen. Midway through the performance, the singer abruptly stopped, visibly shaken. She later recounted seeing a figure standing near the edge of the stage, an old man dressed in tattered clothes, staring at her with hollow, empty eyes. The figure appeared to flicker, as if caught between two worlds. At first, she thought it was a stagehand or perhaps a member of the security team, but when she turned to point him out, he had vanished. Moments later, several members of the audience began to feel a cold breeze sweep through the arena, despite the packed, sweltering atmosphere. People reported feeling an unnatural chill, and some even claimed to hear faint whispers, though no one nearby seemed to be speaking. The concert resumed, but the performer confessed afterward that she couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching her for the rest of the night. This incident wasn't an isolated one. Over the years, various musicians and event staff have reported seeing strange figures lingering in the shadows during performances, sometimes appearing in the upper levels of the arena where no one should be. These ghostly apparitions are often described as being dressed in outdated clothing, with expressions of sorrow or anger etched into their faces. Beyond the stage, the hallways and corridors of the Palacio de los Deportes are said to be haunted by voices, disembodied whispers that echo through the empty spaces when the arena is closed to the public. Security guards and maintenance workers, who often patrol the venue late at night, have shared numerous stories of hearing these eerie voices, despite being completely alone. One such account comes from a veteran guard named Antonio, who has worked at the Palacio for over a decade. In the early hours of the morning, as he made his rounds, he began to hear faint whispers coming from one of the locker rooms near the main floor. Thinking it was another guard or perhaps a technician, he approached, calling out to see who was there. But the moment he stepped inside, the whispers stopped and the room was empty. Shaken, Antonio quickly left, but as he walked back down the corridor, the whispers resumed, this time louder and more distinct. He could make out the sound of a woman sobbing, though the voice seemed to come from nowhere. Unable to explain what he had just experienced, Antonio finished his rounds in silence, too terrified to return to that part of the building for the rest of the night. Several other employees have reported similar encounters, faint voices, footsteps that seem to follow them down long, empty hallways, and even the sound of distant laughter echoing through the vast space. These eerie phenomena have become so common that many staff members refuse to work alone after dark. The Palacio de los Deportes was built in 1968 for the Summer Olympics, intended to be a monument to Mexico's emerging prominence on the world stage. However, the construction of the venue was not without its tragedies. According to historical records, several workers lost their lives during the building process, falling from great heights or suffering fatal accidents. These deaths were often hushed up at the time, swept aside in the rush to complete the project in time for the Olympics. Some believe that the restless spirits of these workers still haunt the arena, unable to move on from the tragic circumstances of their deaths. The shadowy figures seen in the upper levels and the ghostly apparitions that appear during events are often attributed to these lost souls, doomed to wander the site of their demise. Beyond the accidents during construction, the Palacio has also been the site of more recent tragedies. In 1990, during a sold-out concert, a stampede broke out as fans tried to push their way closer to the stage. In the chaos, several people were trampled to death, and dozens more were injured. The incident left a dark stain on the venue's reputation, and some say that the spirits of those who perished in the stampede continue to haunt the Palacio to this day. Several attendees who were present that night have reported feeling an overwhelming sense of panic when returning to the venue, even for unrelated events. Some have experienced vivid flashbacks, as if reliving the terror of that fateful evening. Others have claimed to see shadowy figures lurking in the crowd, figures that vanish when approached. One of the most unsettling aspects of the hauntings at the Palacio de los Deportes is the dark presence said to inhabit the upper levels of the arena. Numerous witnesses have described seeing a shadowy figure standing in the uppermost rows of seats during events, watching the proceedings below with an intense, unsettling gaze. This figure, often described as a tall man dressed in black, appears to move through the shadows, sometimes vanishing and reappearing in different sections of the arena. He is never seen up close, and attempts to approach him have always resulted in his sudden disappearance. Those who have encountered the figure describe a feeling of dread so intense that it becomes difficult to breathe, as if the air itself is being sucked from the room. One chilling account comes from a stagehand who was working late after a concert, helping to dismantle equipment. As he glanced up toward the darkened stands, he saw the figure standing motionless in the shadows. At first, he thought it was a lingering fan or another staff member, but when he called out to the figure, there was no response. The stagehand turned away for a moment to gather his tools, and when he looked back, the figure was gone. Later that night, as he prepared to leave, the stagehand heard footsteps echoing behind him, though the arena was empty. When he turned, he saw the same figure standing at the far end of the hallway, his face obscured in shadow. Terrified, the stagehand fled the building, leaving his tools behind. He refused to work another night shift at the Palacio after that encounter. The Palacio de los Deportes is not just a venue for concerts and sporting events. It is a place where the past lingers, where the echoes of tragedy and loss seem to reverberate through the very walls. For those who have witnessed the supernatural events firsthand, there is no doubt that the Palacio is haunted, its halls filled with the restless spirits of those who met untimely ends. Have you ever felt an unexplainable chill or heard whispers in the dark that sent shivers down your spine? Perhaps you've encountered a ghostly presence that defied reason, much like the spirits lurking in this story. We invite you to share your own experiences in the comments below and join us on our journey through the supernatural. Your story might just be the next chilling tale the world needs to hear.